Alex here with a high conflict child custody video on deserving custody. This isn't really a thing. People don't win custody because they deserve it. And I'm going to go into two different um, sort of perspectives that this concept comes to me. The first one, and this is the most common, is people who will say, I don't understand why this is even an issue in court. I deserve custody because I was with the kids most of the time while we were together. While we were married, while we were together, if it wasn't a marriage, it doesn't matter. And my ex hardly spent any time at all with the kids, so they don't deserve custody. Child custody is not awarded based on who deserves to get it. Child custody is awarded on the best interest of the child prongs. People think that this intersects, and it really doesn't. It doesn't intersect with that whole concept of who earned custody based on their actions before. The biggest reason is because the courts recognize that parents who are together work as a team. And teamwork does not necessarily mean that both members of the team do exactly half of all of the work. Oftentimes, teamwork is a division of different types of work, which one side will do all of and the other side won't do any of. So, in oftentimes, this happens. This is normal. It's perfectly normal for a mom to always prepare the kids' lunches, a dad to provide by going to work, a mom to always take the kids to school and bring them home from school, a dad to spend a few, hours, big chunks of time on the weekend with the kids when he's not working. It's not as though the mom and the dad change exactly half of the diapers. The mom and the dad change or take their kids to school exactly half the time. The mom or the dad prepare meals for the kids exactly half of the time. This is not how real relationships work. And so there is this sort of concept of teamwork. Well, when you guys are splitting up, the courts know that that teamwork situation isn't going to work anymore because you're no longer operating as a team, at least not in the same way that you were when you were together. So it's perfectly normal for a dad who was working all the time to have different ways of spending time with his kids. It's perfectly normal for the dad who never had to change any diapers when they were together to now be okay with and capable of changing diapers. It's perfectly normal for a dad who never prepared meals for his kids before to now learn how to do that and actually do it. It's not a complete, it's not as if that parent is going to have no clue how to do any of those things and they're not going to do it. It's not as if they're going to say, you know, I didn't feed my kids before. My wife prepared all the meals. So now I'm just going to let my kids starve when they're with me. So now I'm not going to take my kids to school. So now I'm not going to change my baby's diapers at all and let him get a rash. And it's not, this doesn't happen. So when people get frustrated because their ex is actually being considered for primary physical or joint physical custody, even though they were the ones that spent all the time with the kids before, I can understand why they're frustrated, but that's not how the law works. The law isn't, they didn't write the statutes to state that the court must consider who did this, this, and this before when they were together, and based on that, award physical custody or legal custody of the kids. It doesn't say that in the statutes at all. The statutes state that these are the criteria, best interests, and it doesn't go into those issues as to who was doing what in the past. It goes into prospectively, how is the child going to be taken care of going forward. And so when people go into court and they say, this isn't fair because he worked all the time and I took care of the kids all the time, that he's going to get joint custody or even primary, it's not fair. Well, that's not what the law's looking at. The judge isn't looking to see who took care of the kids most of the time in the past. The court's looking to see who's capable of taking the kids going forward. Yeah, maybe dad worked all the time, but now that you guys are splitting up, is he capable of doing these things that he didn't do before? He seems like he is, so he's going to get joint physical custody. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. It's not about who deserves what based on how the situation was before. And if you get a lot of times I feel like it's high conflict exes who get bent on this. They obsess over this and they can't let it go because they want the conclusion to fit what they want. Their conclusion is supported by this particular fact, and so they feel like it's unfair that it's not working out their way. And by the way, I go into a video on that. It's called Conclusions Before the Facts. It's a sort of backward way of thinking. I feel like mainly it's a high conflict ex who really can't let go of this. I think ordinary people who are, they feel burned and they're upset. They can start out this way, but they can sort of see the error in that logic, and they can sort of see how their kids will benefit from an involved father. And over time, they will step away from that. Um, they just need to be, it needs to be explained to them by the judge or the attorney, and they may not like it, but they understand it, and they'll embrace it over time. They'll see that their kids are benefiting from the fact that their dad is involved. And I'm using this example because it's the common example today. It's not always this way. Sometimes the mom works and the dad's a stay-at-home dad. I'm just using the most common situation as to when this video was made, just because it's quicker, so I don't have to say he and she, him or her. Usually, when this issue comes to my attention, it's because mom is a stay-at-home mom and dad's at work. He works and provides financially. So usually that's the context that it comes up. So anyway, the whole notion that you're going to get child custody based on the fact that just, you were involved more in the past, it doesn't really get you very far. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Unless the father says, I work all the time, and so I don't want to be a parent now that we're splitting up. If they say that, or if somehow they say, I'm not capable of feeding my kids. I don't know what dad would say that, or I'm not capable of spending time with them. By the way, a parent is allowed to delegate their custodial time to a third-party caregiver. People don't like this, but they're allowed to do this. The Nevada Supreme Court has reversed decisions where the one person complains that the other person's never home and they leave the kids with mom, which is grandma, or aunt or uncle. They're allowed to do that, and the court sees that as beneficial to the kids. The fact that the kids are spending not as much time with your ex as with grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle, it's not something that the court is allowed to hold against that parent. As long as they put that child with a third-party caregiver responsibly, the court should not be able to, at least not in Nevada, modify physical custody based on that alone. And I've seen decisions reverse where a judge did that. So even if it comes down to the fact that your ex is still going to be working a bunch and they're not going to have a lot of time to spend with the kids, even if that's the case, your ex can say, yeah, I am going to be working a lot, but I'm going to have, my mother or my father, grandma or grandpa watching them, or I'm going to put them with, it's something that they're perfectly within the boundaries of the law and parenthood to do that. If they want to do that, they can do that. The court sees that, or the court should see that as beneficial to the kids because they'll get a relationship with their extended family. As I mentioned, some judges don't get that, so they end up getting reversed on appeal, but at least if it's challenged. But that's something that can be done. So I know this is going to be a tough video for some people because some people feel like it's just not fair. Like they've put all of their time and their focus into the kids, and now that they're splitting up, they feel like that's being taken away from them. But the court's not looking to what your concept or notion of fairness is when it comes to who spent more time with the kids in the past. The court's looking to the statutory factors, and the court's looking to the future. It's looking to the children's future. It's not looking to award them as some kind of prize that somebody deserves based on what they've put into it. That's messed up way of dealing with human beings. You're not going to get your kids based on having earned the prize for having spent all this time with them. The court's looking to what's going to make them healthy and happy in the future. And I'm sorry if that means you're not going to get to see them as much because your ex wants joint physical custody, even though they have to work a lot. It's just the court has seen, there's been studies on it, there's been briefs filed that it helps children to have involvement from both sides. And it's unfortunate when people split up that sometimes these quirky things can happen where a person who was a stay-at-home parent all of a sudden finds themselves not seeing their kids as much because a custodial order awarded their ex with joint physical custody, and they're spending half the time with your ex or with your grandma and grandpa. A lot of times that's one of the biggest beefs people have is, I just don't see why I can't spend time with them when my ex is working like before. Well, when in high conflict cases, this is not realistic at all. So coordinating and cooperating and trying to get some, consideration from an ex is probably the best way to go. Litigating on that issue is going to get you very far. I've talked about first right of refusal in the past and how it is a living nightmare in high conflict cases. If you're trying to get something like first right of refusal when your ex goes to work in a high conflict case, that's not a good idea. That's not, because it's just going to create a whole lot more exchanges and a whole lot more drama. If it's a low conflict custody case, it's something that can be worked out with the ex on the side. Or it could be done for extreme situations, such as when the ex goes on vacation and they're gone for weeks at a time. But I'm not going to talk about that because if you want to hear about that, watch the video on First right of refusal. So the other aspect of deserving custody comes to me in the concept of punishment. So what often will happen is the ex will commit some kind of atrocity, and the person will want their ex punished by modifying custody in some way. And the court's not supposed to do that. In fact, there's a case in Nevada, I think it's called Dogger v. Dogger, something like that. I might post it in the description below if I can track it down. But a judge modified custody because it wanted to punish a parent for something they did. And that was reversed because in the criteria of best interest of the child, there's nothing in there that says you award custody by punishing somebody who did something wrong. Now, I want to take a step back and explain something. Oftentimes, when a parent has done something wrong, it will in some way affect one of the best interest factors. And the court can modify custody based on that specific factor, but the court has to state that. It can't just state, such and such parent violated my order, therefore I'm modifying custody. Nowhere in the criteria of best interest does it say a parent violates a court order a bunch of times. It doesn't say that. But like I said, when I took a step back, as I said, oftentimes there's some intersection there. Oftentimes the way that the parent violated the court's order does happen to also coincidentally be one of the best interest factors. It's just that the judge has to explain that in their order. They can't just say that an order was violated. So oftentimes that'll come to my attention. Some of my exes violating court orders all over the place. I should get custody based on that. It's not the case. You can't get custody based on the violation of court orders. What you need to do instead is focus on how those violations also affect the best interest factors. And of course, when you bring it to the court's attention, make sure that the court states that it's modifying custody based on those best interest factors. So in other words, you need to look beyond the punishment. You need to look beyond depriving your ex of custody to punish them, because that's not what it's about. It's about protecting the child. So if you just focus on that, you can make that happen. It's not as big of a deal as the other issue, which is I deserve my kids because I spent all the time with them when we were together. And now that we're splitting up, I should still have the most time with them because that's what we agreed to. This whole thing about, I think the part about wanting to change custody based on punishment is a lot easier to steer people in the right direction than it is with that other perspective that I mentioned. So with that, go ahead and post something in the comments below if you had to deal with this issue in your case. I know a lot of people deal with this. My ex wants primary custody because I was at work all the time. This is a very common thing that comes up. Let me know how it went for you in your case. In Nevada, it doesn't get you anywhere, but maybe in other states it actually is a consideration that the judges make. So hopefully we don't have any bad outcomes there. I do strongly believe that the court should look to what's going to make the kids healthy going forward and less into what parents were doing in the past. Even when it comes down to like parents who've mentally checked out and parents who have mental health issues, even when it comes down to that, sometimes I don't think it's always a great way to base a custody order, because sometimes it's just that the relationship was so toxic. And sometimes a parent who was just mentally checked out and a nervous wreck, when they split up, they really pull themselves back together. So even when it comes to that kind of allegation, I'm not really fully behind modifying or awarding custody even based on that, just because I've seen a lot of situations where a person who just looked like an awful parent, they split up, they became single, they moved out, and they turned out to be a great parent. They just had to get out of that toxic parent or that toxic relationship, and their life really turned around real quick. I've seen that happen. So even in those cases where somebody could seem like they're just an awful parent because of they're basically being emotionally tortured by their ex, sometimes they just need some time to be single. Sometimes they need some time to be on their own to really show the court that they can be a great parent. And if they show the court that they're a better parent single than they were in the relationship, more power to them. And that's going to create a better situation for the kids, because instead of having one parent who's dominant and abusive and another parent who's submissive and all messed up in the head, at least now they'll have a healthy parent who they're not living with their mom or dad, but at least on their own separately, they're a great parent, a great role model, and the kids get to spend some time with them being basically a separate parent who actually turns out to be a great parent because they're not in that pressure cooker relationship, that toxic relationship. So even there, that does surprise people sometimes when they tell me, my ex is they can't handle anything. They have all this anxiety and stress, and they're completely incapable of resolving any issues. I should have custody based on that. Well, I'm like, maybe the judge wants to see that, you know, a few months or even a year of them on their own. Maybe the judge wants to see if they're different when they're single. Maybe the judge wants to see if they can pull themselves together when they're not with you. Not, I'm sorry, but sometimes that happens to be that's what they needed. They just needed to get away and be a single parent. And it's a really sad situation because it's not ideal. Ideally kids benefit when their parents are together. But sometimes in certain situations, in certain families, you can't have the ideal. It just doesn't work. And the best you have to fall back on the best situation, which sometimes is two parents who are split up. Sometimes in certain families, that is better than the ideal. The ideal only works in an ideal situation, which is, the court system deals with reality, real lives, real relationships, and sometimes that's another, I kind of went on a tangent there, but I just wanted to show just how far you could go with that whole concept um, of how a situation before having been split up really isn't always the best indicator of how something is going to go as far as how life will be for the kids after the parents split up. It's not always the best indicator. It's not always going to tell the court who's going to be the better parent. And as I mentioned, oftentimes the better parent is both parents, with rare exceptions, with high conflict situations and personality disordered or other mental health situations. The best parent tends to be both parents. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video.